The tavern had grown louder as the night stretched on. Lantern light flickered warmly against the worn, dark wooden beams, casting shifting gold across the crowded room, while laughter rolled through the space in overlapping waves. Tankards clattered against tables, chairs scraped across the worn floor, and somewhere near the hearth 2 merchants argued loudly about the price of wool with increasing conviction and decreasing accuracy. The air was thick with heat, conversation, and the comforting chaos of a place that had long since passed the point of restraint. At the centre of the room, Hollis stood triumphantly on a small table with his instrument raised high, his silhouette framed by the lantern light as the crowd erupted into applause. "And so concludes the tale," he declared with a theatrical bow, while sweeping one paw outward toward the cheering audience. The applause grew even louder. A few patrons stomped their feet, someone whistled sharply, a tankard was raised in salute. At a corner table, the rest of the party sat watching the performance with a mixture of disbelief and weary acceptance. Vorka leaned back in her chair and rubbed one paw slowly across her face while staring toward the stage, her ears flattening just slightly. "We nearly died 4 times," she muttered. Nick sat beside her and stirred a cup of tea with slow, deliberate circles while watching the crowd with quiet amusement, his posture composed despite the noise around him. "5," he corrected mildly. Sarah rested her chin on the table and flicked her tail lazily while listening to the tavern roar with laughter, her eyes bright with quiet enjoyment. "They liked it," she said with a small grin. Vailor adjusted his spectacles and examined the scene with academic detachment while folding his paws neatly in front of him, his gaze moving from Hollis to the crowd and back again. "The narrative structure has become significantly distorted," he observed calmly. Bramwell lifted his mug of cider and watched Hollis accept several enthusiastic paw shakes from patrons near the table stage, his expression warm and quietly amused. "The spirit of the story remains intact," he said. Alden sat at the far end of the table with one elbow resting lightly against the wood while quietly observing the celebration. Her gaze moved across the room, Hollis, the crowd, her companions, before a faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. She lifted her mug slightly, though whether in acknowledgment or reflection was unclear. Hollis finally returned from the centre of the room, weaving through the crowd with practised ease before dropping into the empty chair beside them. He placed his instrument carefully against the table with one paw, while reaching immediately for a mug with the other. "A rousing success," he announced proudly. Varka narrowed her eyes at him and pointed one paw toward the stage behind him without turning. "You added a dragon," she said flatly. Hollis took a long drink, then wiped the foam from his whiskers with casual satisfaction before shrugging slightly. "Artistic interpretation," he replied. Vailor tilted his head slightly and regarded him over the rim of his spectacles. "There was no dragon," he said calmly. Hollis lifted one paw and gestured toward the crowd filling the tavern, their laughter still lingering in bursts across the room. "They seem to enjoy the dragon," he said. For a moment the table fell quiet. The long road behind them stretched across deserts, ruins, tunnels, and catacombs. The weight of it lingered, not heavy, but present. Mud still clung stubbornly to several cloaks, despite recent attempts to clean them. And the faint ache of travel remained in the way they sat, the way they rested, the way they did not rush to speak. It was the kind of silence that only came after something had been survived together. Varka finally lifted her mug and glanced around the table while resting both elbows on the wood. "So," she said. Everyone looked up. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze moving from one to the next, measuring, expecting. "What now?" Nick set his tea down and folded his paws together thoughtfully while leaning back in his chair, his expression calm as ever. "The world remains quite large," he said mildly. Sarah straightened a little and looked between them with growing curiosity, her whiskers twitching with interest. "We could travel," she suggested. Vailor adjusted his spectacles and tapped one paw lightly against the table while considering the thought. his eyes already distant with possibilities. "There are numerous ruins I have yet to examine," he said. Bramwell lifted his mug again and nodded slowly while watching the others with gentle warmth, his presence steady and reassuring. "Good company improves long roads," he said. Alden studied the table quietly for a moment while listening to the sounds of the tavern around them, the laughter, the music, the life of it. Then she lifted her gaze and rested both paws on the table with calm resolve. "For now," she said. Varka raised one eyebrow. Alden allowed the faintest hint of a smile to return while lifting her mug slightly. "We stay together." Varka grinned. Necks nodded once. Sarah's tail flicked happily. Vailor adjusted his spectacles. Bramwell lifted his cider in quiet agreement. Across the tavern, the crowd continued celebrating the story of their adventure, their voices rising and falling in bright, exaggerated retellings, while Hollis leaned back in his chair with obvious satisfaction, already basking in the legend he had just improved. For now, the heroes of the Golden Squeak had nowhere else to be, and the road was waiting.